On a dusty frontier night, a quiet saloon keeper noticed a wounded coyote limping through the storm, its eyes locked on hers, not with threat, but with a desperate plea. When she stepped outside to help, Emma Thorne couldn't have imagined the chain of deadly events this simple act of mercy would unleash. What hidden force was hunting both woman and beast, and why? Emma Thorne wiped glasses behind the dusty saloon bar, her hands steady and sharp, the repetitive motion calming her restless mind. Once known as the legendary Dead-Eye Thorne, the fastest, deadliest gunslinger across 5 territories, she now lives in the small quiet town of Dusty Creek, pretending to be just a simple saloon keeper. But behind her calm exterior, Emma senses that something isn't right. The law has been avoiding her place, pretending not to see the rough men gathering in town. Honest ranchers, people she's come to know over the past months, have been pushed off their lands, their homes burned, their cattle scattered. The railroad's so-called security men are nothing more than hired thugs, dressed in black hats and iron badges, pretending to bring order but really bringing only fear. Emma has been watching and waiting, gathering information quietly over 3 months, while polishing glasses and serving whiskey. But tonight she knows. Everything changes. Tonight, it begins. Thunder rumbles in the distance, shaking the dusty window. Outside, the air smells of rain and gunpowder. Rosa, her loyal friend and the cook in the back, steps out, wiping her hands on her apron. She glances nervously at Emma, exchanging a silent look that speaks volumes. More riders are coming. Rosa's people, Mexican workers, have seen them. Black hats, expensive horses, weapons that aren't just for show. Emma puts down the glass, her hand pausing, fingers resting briefly on the edge of the bar, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. She has been here before. She knows this pattern. First the polite visits, then the offers, then the threats, and finally the blood. She thinks back to the years she spent on the road, the gunfights she walked away from, the lives she took, the justice she delivered, a legend written in bullets and grave markers. She had hoped she could leave that life behind, find a quiet place where she could just be a woman, not a myth. But peace, she's learned, is a fragile thing in a land ruled by greed. The door swings open, and 3 men walk in, spurs jingling, eyes sharp. She recognizes the leader, James Rattler McGrath, a former Confederate cavalry officer turned hired gun, known across 3 states for his ruthlessness. Behind him, his lieutenants spread out, Wolf Carson by the back door, Quick Hand Murphy drifting toward the stairs, cutting off escape. Emma stays calm, keeps wiping the glass, her body relaxed but ready. McGrath slides onto a bar stool, his smile cold, eyes assessing. They exchange words, veiled threats, dressed as polite conversation. He mentions the railroad, hints at the protection they offer, warns about accidents that can happen to stubborn folks who don't cooperate. Emma meets his gaze evenly, offering water instead of whiskey, a quiet reminder that she's been reading men like him long before he walked into her place. But behind her calm, her mind races, calculating positions, distances, angles. She knows every inch of this saloon, every weapon hidden in plain sight, every path in and out. Rosa appears briefly in the kitchen doorway, a silent warning passing between them. Emma remembers Murphy's reputation, his custom Colt, ivory grips, lightning fast draw. But she's seen faster, she's been faster, and she'll be faster again, if it comes to that. McGrath leaves a business card on the bar, the railroad company's logo stamped boldly on top, along with a handwritten number. He says they'll be seeing her soon. Emma picks up the card, studying it, feeling the pieces clicking into place in her mind. The Iron Brigade, they call themselves, pretending to be security men, but really they're an organized force, disciplined, methodical, too calculated for mere intimidation. Emma sends Rosa to warn Miguel, an old ally, once a Texas Ranger, now a private investigator. If the Iron Brigade is up to something bigger, they'll need evidence. She unlocks a hidden box in her back office, retrieving her old Colts, matched revolvers with shortened barrels, still gleaming after years of disuse. She runs her fingers over the steel, the familiar weight anchoring her, reminding her who she is. As the rain begins to pour, she watches from the window, noting the fresh hoofprints in the mud, the cigarette butts left by men watching her play. She feels the old energy stirring in her veins, the sharp, cold focus she thought she'd buried. Rosa brings coffee, her weathered face etched with worry. They talk quietly, exchanging what they fires at the Martinez Ranch, the Miller place, gone under suspicious circumstances, surveyors more interested in land grabs than train route. Emma's heart hardens as the pattern becomes clear. This isn't about laying track, it's about seizing gold, copper, water rights, the entire future of the territory. Miguel arrives dripping wet, bringing news, wagons moving at night, men with military rifles guarding old trails, a mining engineer who turned up dead after asking too many questions. Before he died, the man hid geological surveys, proving the railroad's true aim, a vast gold vein beneath the land they're grabbing. Emma thinks of the people who trust her, who come to her saloon for shelter, for a kind word, for a drink at the end of a hard day. She thinks of the ranchers driven off, the families shattered, the friends who've disappeared. She feels the old steel rise inside her, the part of her that doesn't run, doesn't bow, doesn't break. They call her Deadeye for a reason. She gathers her allies, sends messages, starts planning. She knows the governor's coming to town, ready to sign the papers that will make all the land theft legal. She knows Harrison, the railroad's head, won't stop at signatures. He's planning to eliminate witnesses, using hired killers, blaming the violence on Apache raid. But Emma has something Harrison doesn't. People who believe in her, people who remember the old days when justice mattered, when a person's word was their bond. At the abandoned mission, she meets with old friends, Thunder Thompson, the legendary U.S. Marshal, Sarah Hawkins, the Angel of Justice, Running River, the half-Cherokee tracker, whose name carries weight on both sides of the border. They map out the plan, study the enemy's defenses, mark the locations of the Gatling guns, the bunkhouses, the armory. They know the risks, know the odds are against them, but they're not here for safety. They're here because some fights need to be fought, even when they can't be won. Emma rides out at dawn, her blue dress laid carefully across her saddle, her Colts hidden beneath her riding coat. She watches the sun rise over the desert, feels the wind tug at her hair, listens to the silence of a land, waiting to see what kind of people will shape its future. She knows Harrison's men are watching, knows they're gathering, knows they're armed to the teeth. But she also knows the power of a legend, the power of a name whispered in fear across 5 territories. Deadeye Thorn is coming, and she's not coming alone. As she rides toward Harrison's fortified ranch, she feels the old calm settle over her, the sharp, clear focus of a woman who has walked through fire and come out the other side. She thinks of Rosa, Miguel, Thunder, Sarah, Running River, the ranchers, the townsfolk, the children, all the lives hanging in the balance. She thinks of the sacrifices made, the blood already spilled, the promises broken. She thinks of the life she wanted, quiet, peaceful, ordinary, and the life she has, fierce, relentless, unstoppable. She straightens in the saddle, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Tonight, the governor will stand on the stage, signing papers under the watchful eyes of killers. Tonight, the Iron Brigade will move to silence every voice of dissent. Tonight, Harrison will believe he's won. But he's made one fatal mistake. He's underestimated the woman behind the bar, the woman with the quiet eyes and the steady hands, the woman who once outdrew 47 of the deadliest men the West ever saw. Emma Thorne knows this land. She knows its people, and she knows that some legends are built on truth. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the desert, Emma Thorne rides into her destiny, a lone figure against a rising storm, ready to remind the world why they called her Deadeye, and why some stories are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. 3 rough men swagger into the dusty saloon, boots scraping against the worn wooden floor, the door swinging wide with a creak that pulls every eye in the room toward them. They carry themselves like wolves among sheep, predatory smiles and cold, assessing stares. their presence sending a hush rippling through the crowd. James McGrath, the leader, walks ahead, a tall man with a weathered face, his eyes sharp and calculating, a thin scar cutting down his cheek. Beside him are his crew, two hard-faced men named Burke and Slade, each carrying the hard air of gunslingers who've lived too long on the edge. Emma stands behind the bar, wiping a glass clean, her golden hair falling loose around her face. She looks the part of the saloon girl, all soft edges and practiced smiles. But behind her eyes, something keen and sharp burns. She sees everything, every twitch, every shift of weight, every flicker of threat. McGrath strides up to the bar, taps his fingers lightly, and gives her a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Whiskey," he says softly, but there's steel under his voice. Emma paused, watching his reflection in the bottle, feeling the weight of the entire saloon pressing in. The regulars, ranch hands, gamblers, a few dusty travelers, keep their heads down, pretending not to notice, but Emma can feel their tension, their silent prayers, that trouble doesn't spill out across the room. McGrath sips his drink, never breaking eye contact. Then, with a casual flick, he slides a business card across the counter. Emma picks it up, her fingers brushing the embossed gold letters. Central Pacific Railroad, protection, partnership, progress. She knows what it means. Everyone in these parts knows. The railroad is pushing through the valley, and anyone standing in its way, ranchers, small towns, even a lone saloon, will be offered protection. Refuse, and accidents happen. Fires start, supplies vanish, people disappear. Emma smiles faintly, tucking the card into her apron, but her heart pounds in her chest. She knows this isn't an offer, it's a warning. McGrath leans in slightly, his breath warm, his words soft. "Think it over, miss. No one wants to see this place fall on hard times." Burke chuckles, low and mean. Slade taps the butt of his gun against the bar, a quiet rhythm like a ticking clock. Emma meets McGrath's gaze, tilting her head just slightly, her smile still in place. "Thank you kindly," she says, voice smooth, but inside she's already calculating, already planning. She's no stranger to threats. She's weathered storms before, losses that carved deep scars inside her, but she's still standing, and she's not about to fold now. As the men turn and swagger out, the saloon slowly exhales, conversations picking back up in nervous murmurs. Emma lets out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She glances down at the card again, fingers tightening around. She knows she needs to warn the others. Caleb, the blacksmith, old Mr. Harris at the general store, the ranchers out near the creek. This isn't just about her saloon, it's about the whole town. The railroad's reach is long, and their pockets deep, but Emma has roots here, ties of memory and blood, and stubborn defiance. She moves through the rest of the evening like a shadow, pouring drinks, offering smiles, but her mind is already racing ahead. She remembers her father's voice, telling her stories of standing up to bigger men, of holding the line even when the odds were stacked. She thinks of her mother, who taught her that sometimes the strongest weapon is patience, waiting for the right moment. That night, after the lamps are dimmed and the chairs stacked, Emma stands alone in the quiet, staring out the window at the darkened street. She presses the card flat against the glass, watching the moonlight glint off the gold letter. There's fear coiling in her gut, sure, but under it is something fiercer, a burn of resolve. They think she's just a saloon girl, just another easy mark, but they don't know the fight in her. She's not alone, and she won't let this town fall without a fight. Somewhere out there James McGrath and his Iron Brigade might be planning their next move, thinking they've already won, but Emma's already setting her pieces in place. The weight of what's coming settles heavy on her shoulders, but she squares them, drawing in a steady breath. Tomorrow, she'll gather the others, lay out the truth, and start building a defense. She knows they're outnumbered, outgunned, but that's never stopped her before. She's survived loss, betrayal and heartbreak. This is just another battle. As the night stretches on, she sits by the empty hearth, the quiet ticking of the old clock filling the room, and lets the memories wash over her. Her father's laugh, The smell of her mother's baking, the sound of old friends singing late into the night, all of it fuels the fire inside her. She won't let them take this place, not without a fight, not without a stand. Tomorrow the Iron Brigade will see just how wrong they were to underestimate her. Emma sat by the dim window, the cold glass under her fingertips, as she watched the storm clouds gather over the hills, casting the land in a thick, suffocating shadow. Rosa, her loyal friend, paced behind her, clutching a worn notebook filled with names, dates, and whispered rumors. Ranchers vanishing overnight, their lands mysteriously signed over to the railroad. Fires that erupted suddenly, burning only the properties of those who resisted selling. Crops destroyed, cattle poisoned, barns collapsing under suspicious circumstances. Emma's heart ached. She knew these tactics all too well. As a young woman, she had seen men like these sweep through Texas towns, breaking the will of proud families and forcing them to their knees. She had escaped that world once, burying her past and the sharp-shooting skills that had earned her a reputation she wished she could forget. But now, standing at the edge of her quiet life, she realized peace had only been borrowed, and the debt had come due. Quietly, Emma reached into the old wardrobe, where the gun case had sat untouched for years. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the heavy latches, revealing the twin Colts, their metal gleaming with a cold familiarity. Rosa watched silently, her eyes wide, understanding the weight of this moment. Emma ran her fingers over the engraved handles, memories flooding back of dusty trails, sun-scorched duels, and nights hiding in shadows. She could feel the ghost of her former self stir, the woman she had tried so hard to leave behind. But the ranchers needed her. Rosa handed her the notebook, the pages shaking slightly in her hands. "We can't do this alone," Rosa whispered. Emma nodded, pulling out a weathered slip of paper, the only connection she had left to Miguel, the old Texas Ranger, who had once sworn to stand by her side, no matter what. She lit the lantern, sealing a short message with trembling hands. "They're back. Need you." As the storm outside began to rage, Emma stood tall, fastening her holster with a practiced ease. The thunder rolled like drums of war, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the determined fire in her eyes. She was no stranger to fear, no stranger to fighting back. The railroad men thought they could scare her, thought they could take everything she loved without consequence, but they were wrong. Rosa squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise of loyalty. Together, they would stand, even if the odds were against them. Emma knew the road ahead would be hard. There would be losses, betrayals, maybe even death, but she was done hiding. She was done pretending she wasn't the sharpest shot for miles. As the rain pounded the roof, she thought of the families who had trusted her, the friends who had disappeared without a trace, and the children who deserved a future free from fear. She holstered the Colts, feeling the familiar weight settle against her hips, grounding her, reminding her who she was. Outside, the wind howled like a warning, but inside, Emma was steady, resolute. She glanced once more at Rosa, offering a small grim smile. "Let's finish this." Together, they stepped into the storm, knowing full well it was only the beginning. The railroad's men would come, with their threats, their guns, their hired muscle. But Emma had faced worse. She had survived worse. She had bled for this land before, and she would bleed for it again if she had to. Every step forward was a reclaiming of the strength she'd buried, the courage she'd feared she'd lost. The path was clear now, lit not just by lightning, but by the unyielding fire in her chest. This was her home, her fight, her redemption, and no one, not the railroad, not the fires, not the shadows creeping through the hills, would take it from her. She was ready. Rosa was ready, and somewhere out there, she knew, Miguel was already on his way. Together, they would uncover every secret buried in the shadows, pull every lie into the light, and make the men who thought they could buy this land pay dearly for underestimating the quiet woman who had once been a legend. As they rode out into the night, the storm swallowed them whole, but Emma's heart burned brighter than the lightning in the sky. She was no stranger to storms, she was no stranger to war, and this time, she wouldn't be standing alone. Miguel arrived at the camp just before dawn, his horse lathered with sweat, his face pale under the dirt and grime. Emma stood waiting, arms crossed, her eyes sharp as flint. Miguel slid off the saddle, breathless, and without a word handed her a battered notebook. "They're using military wagons," he said hoarsely. "Armed guards. And they're not laying tracks. Emma, they're sneaking supplies through hidden trails, using the cover of night, bypassing towns and checkpoints. They're taking land, Emma, not just buying it, stealing it." Emma's jaw tightened, her hands clenching around the notebook, as she flipped through hastily drawn maps, lists of coordinates, and names. "What's worse," Miguel went on, "they've been eliminating anyone who resists. Farmers, ranchers, anyone who stands in their way, gone, vanished, killed." Emma's chest ached with a mix of rage and sorrow. She thought back to the missing families she'd heard rumors about, the small holdings that had gone up in flames, the quiet graves by the roadside. This wasn't just business. This was cruelty. This was greed weaponized. This was injustice on a scale she hadn't dared imagine. Her fists trembled as she squeezed the notebook. "How many?" she whispered. Miguel swallowed hard. "Too many, Emma. Dodes, maybe more. And they're still moving." She turned away, blinking hard, feeling the sting of unshed tears. She thought of her father, who had taught her that justice wasn't just a word, it was a duty. She thought of the children whose homes were now smoldering ash, of the mothers waiting for husbands who'd never return. She thought of the cold, calculated evil behind the railroad men's polished smiles. Emma squared her shoulders. "We can't let this go on," she said, her voice low but fierce. Miguel nodded grimly. "I've got names, locations, supply lines, but we'll need help. We can't fight them alone." Emma's mind raced. Who could they trust? Who had the courage to stand up against this machine of corruption? She thought of the old Union men, the ex-soldiers who'd had their fill of blood, the townsfolk, who still believed in right and wrong. Maybe, just maybe, they could rally them, but it would be dangerous, more dangerous than anything they'd faced before. "We'll need a plan," she murmured, "and fast." Miguel glanced nervously at the horizon. "They know someone's watching, Emma. I barely made it out." She set her jaw. "Then we move before they come for us." Over the next hours, Emma and Miguel worked tirelessly, sketching out strategies, marking key points on the map, sending out quiet messages to trusted allies. Every time Emma paused, she saw the faces of the fallen, the ones they couldn't save, and it drove her harder. By nightfall they had a plan: disrupt the supply lines, expose the stolen goods, gather testimonies, make enough noise that the railroad men couldn't hide in the shadows any longer. But as they moved, they knew they were being hunted. Whispers in town, shadows at the edge of camp, strange riders on distant hills. Emma felt the weight of every decision, every risk. She wondered if they were strong enough, if she was strong enough, to stand against a machine fueled by greed and protected by violence. But then she'd look at Miguel, at the small team forming around them, and she'd remember why they fought. Not for land, not for profit, but for people, for dignity, for justice. The night was long, filled with hurried plans and quiet determination. As dawn broke, Emma stood looking out over the hills, feeling the enormity of what lay ahead. She knew they might not all make it. She knew the railroad men would come with everything they had. But she also knew that this was the moment to stand, to push back, to say, and this was no longer just a fight over tracks and territory. This was a battle for the soul of their land, for the right to live free from fear and oppression. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the fire in her chest, the unshakable resolve that came when you knew you were fighting for something bigger than yourself. She turned to Miguel and the others, a small determined smile on her face. "Let's get to work," she said. And as they moved out, as the sun rose over the bloodied trails and stolen lands, Emma felt the stirring of hope, fragile, fierce, and unyielding. They would not go quietly. They would not bow to the dark patterns unfolding before them. They would rise. They would fight. and they would shine a light into the shadows, no matter the cost. Emma sat on the edge of her narrow bed, fingers trembling, as she traced the worn leather of the holster laid out before her. Rain lashed the window pane in jagged rhythms, thunder rumbling like distant war drums. For years, she had buried Deadeye Thorn, the name that once echoed across the Badlands, the name whispered in saloons and outlaw camps, with a mix of awe and dread. She had left that life behind, burying it deep under layers of quiet living, far from the blood-soaked trails she once rode. But the past has a way of clawing its way back, and tonight, it came knocking loud. Memories surged, the faces of those she couldn't save, the ones she failed, the countless gunfights, the weight of the lives she took. She remembered the promises she made, to herself, to the ones she loved, that she would never pick up the gun again. Yet here she was, strapping on her old belt, feeling the familiar weight of the revolvers at her hips. Each buckle cinched tight was a reminder that sometimes, to protect the innocent, you have to become the thing you fear. A tear slipped down her cheek as she gazed at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Not the farmer's widow she pretended to be, not the gentle woman who taught children how to read, but the hardened gunslinger who never missed, the one who could walk through a hail of bullets and come out unscathed. She hated this part of herself, the cold precision, the way her mind calculated angles and outcomes, turning violence into an art. But tonight, she couldn't afford softness. The townsfolk were counting on her. She heard them whispering her name again, after all these years, calling for the legend to rise. She clenched her fists, feeling the ghost of old scars, the ache in her bones from past battles, the toll of a life spent on the edge. Outside, lightning split the sky, casting her room in sharp white light for a heartbeat. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Somewhere out there, men were coming, men who knew no mercy, men who burned homes and laughed over graves. She couldn't let them tear this place apart. She had come here to find peace, but peace was not always given freely. Sometimes it had to be fought for. Her heart pounded like a drum, each beat a battle cry. She fastened the last strap, letting the guns settle into place like they belonged there all along. She remembered the last time she fired them, the smell of gunpowder, the sharp recoil, the silence that followed when it was all over. It wasn't glory she chased, it was survival, and sometimes just. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer for the souls she was about to face, and for her own, already burdened by so many past sins. As she stepped out into the storm, the wind tore at her coat, the rain cold and relentless, but she didn't flinch. Her boots struck the mud with purpose, every step a return, every stride a reclaiming of who she was. Deadeye Thorn was not a myth, she was flesh and blood, and she was coming. The night awaited, and with it, the reckon. The moon slid from behind the clouds, pale and watchful, as if even the heavens held their breath. Emma's jaw tightened. She had made her choice. For the sake of those who couldn't fight, she would become the fighter once more. She thought of the children in the town, the families huddled in their homes, praying she'd succeed. There was no room for doubt. The time for running was over. She walked down the main street, each empty window watching, each shadow whispering stories of the past. Her boots echoed, a steady rhythm in the chaos of the storm. She felt the cold steel at her side, the familiar comfort and curse. She didn't want this life, but life had chosen her for it once, and now it called her back. She inhaled sharply, tasting the rain, the dirt, the electric charge in the air before a fight. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as a hawk's, every sense honed by years of survival. She thought of the ones she loved and lost, the ones who taught her how to stand, how to fight, how to endure. This was for them too. This was for everyone who believed that people could change, even when the world refused to let them. Her hands hovered over the grips, steady despite the storm. She had buried Deadeye Thorn, yes, but you can't bury what the world won't let die. Thunder cracked, shaking the ground, but Emma stood firm, a figure carved in defiance, an unyielding force against the night. She whispered to the wind, to the ghosts of her past, to the foes who waited in the darkness, "I am still here, I have always been here." and I will not fall. She took the first step forward, and the storm moved with her. Emma paced the dusty floor of the old telegraph office, her fingers trembling as she read the latest decoded message from their informant. The territorial governor, a powerful figure, draped in false promises, was arriving the next day for the official signing ceremony. A ceremony that would turn the railroad's shadowy land grabs into legal ownership, displacing hundreds of families, ranchers, and small townsfolk. Emma's team, a patchwork of whistleblowers, disillusioned railroad workers, and local farmers, had worked for months to uncover the truth, and now they stood on the edge of something far larger than they'd ever imagined. What they first believed was just a case of local corruption, a few bribes to smooth the way for tracks cutting through farmland, had unraveled into a sprawling conspiracy that spanned multiple states. Blackmail files, suspicious murders of dissenting town council members, payoffs to judges, and now the governor himself tied into the plot. It wasn't just about land anymore, it was about power, wealth, and control stretching over the entire frontier. Emma felt the weight of it like a stone in her chest. She remembered the faces of the families she'd spoken to: old Mr. Calhoun, whose farm had been in his family for 3 generations, the young widow Mary, whose husband had died under mysterious circumstances after protesting the railroad surveyors, the children who would now have no home. This was no longer just a mission, it was a moral reckoning. Emma's second-in-command, Jonah, slammed a folder onto the table. "Look at this," he said, his voice hoarse. Inside were documents tying the governor's office directly to the murder of a federal land agent, who had threatened to expose the railroad's fraud. Emma felt her hands go cold. She stared at the dusty light filtering through the cracked window, and realized they were up against, not just a corporation, but an empire that killed to protect its interests. Outside, the townsfolk were preparing for the ceremony, unaware of the noose tightening around their future. Emma knew they had only hours left. "We need to go public," she whispered. Jonah shook his head. "If we go now, they'll crush us. We need proof, solid, undeniable proof, or they'll bury this, and us with it." The team worked through the night, piecing together witness statements, financial records, and telegram copies. As dawn broke, Emma watched the sun rise over the horizon, thinking of the life she'd once dreamed of, a quiet life on her family's ranch, not this endless fight against giants. But there was no turning back. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "We'll confront him," she said at last. On the steps of the courthouse, before the papers are signed, Jonah looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "It's dangerous. They won't just let you walk up to him." But Emma was resolute. She thought of her father, one of the first ranchers driven off the land, who had died bitter and broken. She thought of every grave laid in the wake of the railroad's march. This wasn't just about stopping a deal, it was about exposing the rot at the heart of the system. As the hour of the ceremony approached, the courthouse square filled with people, townsfolk, railroad men, government officials, and now heavily armed guards. Emma stood at the edge, her heart pounding, clutching the final piece of evidence, a signed confession from one of the railroad's enforcers. She took a deep breath. She was just one woman, but sometimes one was enough. As she stepped into the square, the crowd parted slightly, sensing the tension. The governor appeared on the courthouse steps, flanked by guards, a smug smile on his face. Emma's voice rang out, clear and fierce. "Before you sign that paper, the people deserve to know the truth." A hush fell over the crowd. She saw the governor's face tighten, a flicker of recognition, and then cold calculation. She laid out the evidence piece by piece, her voice trembling but firm, detailing the murders, the blackmail, the bribes. People began to murmur, anger and shock rippling through the crowd. The governor tried to laugh it off, to dismiss her, but Emma held firm, raising the confession high. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, and then, the governor gave a small, sharp nod. Guards surged forward. Jonah and the rest of the team rushed in, trying to shield Emma. Chaos erupted. Emma felt a blow to her shoulder, spun, fell hard to the ground, pain lancing through her. But as she struggled up, She saw townsfolk pushing back, people shouting, grabbing at the guards, turning the tide. She realized something profound in that instant. The power was never just in documents or proof, it was in the people standing together. Even as the world blurred at the edges from pain and exhaustion, Emma forced herself to her feet. The crowd roared, not in violence, but in collective defiance. The governor was retreating, his men outnumbered. The ceremony halted. Somewhere in the din, Jonah caught her arm, steadying her. "We did it," he murmured, voice rough with disbelief. Emma looked around, chest heaving, eyes bright with unshed tears. They had exposed the conspiracy, cracked it open in front of everyone. There would still be fights ahead, legal battles, reprisals, but they had broken the illusion of untouchable power. She smiled faintly through the pain. For the first time in months, she felt hope, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered under the railroad's shadow. The plot had thickened, and now finally, the people had a chance to write their own ending. At an old mission church, nestled in the quiet outskirts of the city, Emma stood quietly, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. The air was heavy with history, the walls whispering stories of battles fought long ago. She wasn't alone in her mission tonight. She was about to meet legends, warriors of justice, whose names had become almost mythical in the underground resistance. There was Jack Thunder Thompson, a man whose fierce spirit roared louder than the storms he was named after. His broad shoulders and weathered face told of countless battles, each scar a testament to his courage and the price he had paid for standing up to oppression. Then there was Sarah Angel of Justice Hawkins, whose eyes held a fire that refused to be dimmed despite the pain she carried inside. Known for her unwavering kindness and fierce resolve, Sarah had become a symbol of hope for many. But beneath her calm exterior was a heart that ached from sacrifices she had been forced to make. Lastly, Benjamin Running River, a quiet but powerful presence, whose connection to the earth and his ancestors gave him strength beyond the physical. His wisdom ran deep like the rivers of his homeland, and his scars, though not always visible, told of struggles fought in silence, but with fierce determination. As Emma looked at these figures, she felt the weight of what they represented, the relentless fight against injustice, a fight that had cost them everything but never their spirit. They gathered around a worn wooden table, the faint light from a single candle casting shadows that danced on their faces, revealing both strength and vulnerability. Together they planned their next move, a desperate but necessary attempt to stop the expansion of the railroad that threatened to destroy their communities and silence their voices forever. The railroad wasn't just steel and wood. It was a symbol of greed, displacement, and the erasure of history. Each of them knew the stakes were unimaginably high. This mission wasn't just about halting progress, it was about protecting the legacy of those who had come before, and those who would come after. Their conversation was heavy with unspoken fears and shared memories of friends lost and battles barely survived. They understood that this time, the cost might be even greater. Some of them might not make it out alive. But in that somber acknowledgement there was also a fierce determination, a promise to stand united, until the very end. Emma felt her resolve harder. She had come seeking allies, but she found a family bound not by blood but by the scars they bore, and the dreams they refused to give up. As they finalized their plans, the silence between them was filled with a profound understanding. This was not just a fight for the present, but a fight for the soul of their land, their people, and their future. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, as if echoing their silent vow. They would face whatever came next together, carrying the weight of their past, and the hope of tomorrow. And in that mission church, surrounded by old walls steeped in faith and struggle, Emma and her newfound comrades prepared to stand against the storm, undaunted, unyielding, and unbroken. The railroad men, their faces hardened by greed and cruelty, had doubled their guards around the small town, their cold eyes scanning every shadow and alley with suspicion and menace, as if expecting the very air to betray the secrets they desperately wanted to bury. A deadly atmosphere thickened the night air, heavy with tension and the distant rumble of a newly installed Gatling gun. echoed ominously over the hills, a mechanical beast meant not just for defense, but for annihilation, promising a violent showdown that would stain the earth red with innocent blood. Emma, standing by the window of the modest house where she had taken refuge, felt a chill not from the cold, but from the dread sinking deep into her bones. As she watched more hired killers riding into town by the hour, their horses' hooves pounding like the drums of impending doom, their faces were unfamiliar. Ruthless mercenaries summoned by the railroad's insatiable thirst for power, men who would stop at nothing to ensure the land was seized, the people silenced, and the truth hidden beneath layers of lies and death. The celebration planned for the signing, the supposed crowning moment of progress and prosperity, revealed itself to Emma as a sinister masquerade, a cruel facade of joy designed to lure the landowners, the witness, and the town's brave souls into a deadly trap, where their voices would be forever silenced, erased like footprints in the dust. With a sinking heart, Emma pieced together the railroad's true intentions. After the signing, when the papers were signed, and the smiles were painted on, the hired guns would carry out a merciless slaughter, killing every landowner who dared to stand for justice, every witness who could tell the tale, and then they would blame the atrocities on Apache raids, turning victims into villains, and rewriting history with blood-stained lies. Her mind raced with desperate thoughts, each one more terrifying than the last, as she realized the enormity of the betrayal, how those who promised prosperity had brought death, how the celebration was a charade masking a massacre, how the guns and the guards were tools of extermination, not protection. Emma's heart ached for her neighbors, people she had shared bread with, laughed with, cried with, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the fathers and mothers who had worked the land for generations, now marked for death like cattle awaiting slaughter. She could almost hear the faint whispers of their fears carried on the dry wind, the quiet prayers for safety swallowed by the growing roar of violence. But amid the fear, a fierce flame of resolve ignited within her, a determination to warn those who could still be saved, to expose the railroad's cruelty before the bloodshed began, to fight not just for survival, but for the truth. She knew it would not be easy. Every step was shadowed by spies and enemies, every breath a gamble between life and death. But Emma was no longer just a bystander. She had become a beacon of hope in a town poised on the edge of destruction. As night deepened, the guards' watchful eyes grew colder, the Gatling gun's silhouette against the moon a grim reminder of the slaughter to come, and the hired killers gathered like wolves, ready to pounce. The town's once cheerful streets were now battlegrounds waiting to erupt in flames of violence and sorrow, and Emma, with trembling hands and a heart full of courage, prepared to face the deadly setup, knowing that the fight ahead would test the limits of her strength, her faith, and her humanity. The coming hours would decide not only the fate of the town, but the very soul of justice in a world where greed and cruelty threatened to consume all. In that dark moment, with the air thick with danger and despair, Emma whispered a vow into the night. She would not let the railroad's lies be the last story told. She would not let the blood of the innocent be spilled in silence, and she would stand, fierce and unyielding, against the storm of violence descending upon her home. Emma's heart pounded like a wild drum in her chest, as she slipped through the shadows, cloaked in the grime and faded colors of a kitchen helper. The very image of invisibility in the enemy's bustling camp. Each step was a careful dance, a quiet negotiation with fate. As she moved past rows of tents lit by flickering lanterns and guarded by watchful gunmen who seemed to smell danger in the air, but couldn't quite place it. She had heard the whispers. Tom Chen, the merchant whose sharp mind and courage had uncovered critical evidence that could bring down the enemy's entire operation, was being held captive somewhere within these walls. The knowledge that he was alive but trapped and desperate pushed her forward through the maze of danger. Emma's hands, calloused from years of struggle but steady now, gripped a small knife concealed beneath her apron, a token of both defense and determination. She recalled the countless nights of planning, the moments of doubt, and the burning hope that refused to die within her. As she approached the dimly lit tent where Tom was said to be held, the clamor of alarm bells suddenly shattered the night's fragile quiet. Shouts and the sharp crack of gunfire erupted, sending a wave of panic through the camp. The enemy was on high alert, and Emma knew she had only moments to act. Her pulse surged as she slipped inside, finding Tom chained and weak but alive. His eyes, once full of despair, now shone with relief and fierce gratitude as she freed him with trembling hands. Together they moved swiftly, weaving through the chaos as gunmen scrambled to find the source of the disruption. Emma's mind raced, balancing fear and resolve, knowing that this was more than a rescue, it was a message. As they reached the camp's outer edge, she paused just long enough to carve a clear message into the wooden gate with a sharp stone. "We are not as untouchable as you believe." The words were a beacon of hope for those oppressed, a challenge to their enemies, and a promise that courage and justice would never be silenced. The night swallowed them whole as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the noise and fury, but carrying with them the spark of rebellion that would grow stronger with every brave step forward. Emma's story was no longer just about survival. It was about the fierce power of standing up against injustice, even when the odds seemed impossible. The cold night air bit at their skin, but inside, a fire burned brighter than ever, fueled by the unwavering belief that freedom was worth every risk. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Emma and Tom vanished into the unknown, their hearts heavy with loss but alight with hope, knowing that this night, this dangerous gamble had changed everything. The enemies would remember the night a kitchen helper slipped past their guards, rescuing a man and shattering their illusion of safety. And Emma, though weary, knew this was only the beginning of a fight that would echo far beyond the walls of the lion's den. Emma's heart pounded like a wild drum in her chest as she slipped through the shadows, cloaked in the grime and faded colors of a kitchen helper, the very image of invisibility in the enemy's bustling camp. Each step was a careful dance, a quiet negotiation with fate. As she moved past rows of tents lit by flickering lanterns and guarded by watchful gunmen who seemed to smell danger in the air, but couldn't quite place it, she had heard the whispers. Tom Chen, the merchant whose sharp mind and courage had uncovered critical evidence that could bring down the enemy's entire operation, was being held captive somewhere within these walls. The knowledge that he was alive but trapped and desperate pushed her forward through the maze of danger. Emma's hands, calloused from years of struggle but steady now, gripped a small knife concealed beneath her apron, a token of both defense and determination. She recalled the countless nights of planning, the moments of doubt, and the burning hope that refused to die within her. Her breath came shallow and quick, a steady rhythm keeping pace with the pounding in her chest. The camp was a maze of voices and noises, men shouting orders, horses stamping, the occasional metallic clang of weapons. But Emma moved with purpose, blending into the background as if she belonged to this dirty world. Every corner held the possibility of discovery, every glance from a guard could end her mission in an instant. Yet she pressed on, driven by a promise she had made to herself and to Tom. The stakes were high. Failure meant more than just her capture. It meant the loss of vital evidence that could save countless lives from tyranny and corruption. The thought steeled her nerves as she neared the tent where Tom was imprisoned. The night was thick, almost suffocating, but Emma didn't flinch. Suddenly the shrill sound of alarm bells ripped through the camp, breaking the fragile silence of the night. Shouts echoed as gunmen scrambled, weapons raised, eyes searching frantically for the Her heart leapt into her throat, but she knew this was the moment to act. Slipping inside the tent, she found Tom weak but alive, his chains rusted, but still biting into his wrists. His eyes, clouded with pain and fear just moments before, now sparkled with a flicker of hope at the sight of her. Emma knelt beside him, whispering words of reassurance as she worked quickly to break his bonds. The faint clink of chains falling to the floor was the sweetest sound she had ever heard. Together they slipped through the camp, shadows among shadows, dodging gunfire and frantic guards. Every step was a prayer, every breath a plea to the night to keep them safe. Emma's mind raced, her senses sharp, as she navigated the labyrinth of tents and watchposts. They were close to freedom, but the danger was far from over. As they reached the outer edge of the camp, Emma paused long enough to carve a clear message into the wooden gate with a sharp stone. "We are not as untouchable as you believe." It was a simple act, but powerful proof that even in the darkest moments, resistance could take root and grow. The words glinted in the moonlight, a beacon for those who might come after, a challenge to the enemy's arrogance. Then, without looking back, Emma and Tom vanished into the night, swallowed by the darkness, but burning bright with determination. The cold air stung their faces, but inside a fierce fire of hope and courage raged. Emma knew this night was a turning point, not just for them, but for everyone who dared to stand against the lion's den. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but the taste of freedom was too sweet to ignore. They carried with them not just the evidence, but the unshakable belief that no fortress was truly impenetrable and no oppressor invincible. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Emma and Tom disappeared beyond the horizon, their hearts heavy with loss but burning bright with hope. They had slipped into the lion's den and lived to tell the tale, a story that would inspire others to rise, to fight, and to believe in the power of one brave soul to change the world. Back at the saloon, the air hung heavy with tension, the once lively hum of laughter and clinking glasses, now replaced by a fearful silence that seemed to choke the life out of every corner. The Iron Brigade's watchful eyes burned into every face, their presence a constant reminder of the harsh grip tightening around the town like an unforgiving vice. The rough boots echoing on the wooden floorboards, the cold, steely gazes of those enforcers, and the sharp clang of chains made the saloon less a place of refuge and more a prison of dread. Yet beneath that heavy veil of fear, an ember glowed quietly but fiercely, refusing to be snuffed out. It was the ember of anger, deep, raw, and growing stronger by the day, feeding on the pain and injustice that the Iron Brigade inflicted. It was in the stolen glances between weary townsfolk, in the clenched fists hidden beneath worn coats, and in the whispered words passed from one trembling lip to another, in the dead of night. Emma, standing at the heart of this growing storm, felt the shift beneath her feet, not just a change in the wind, but a powerful current of courage, rising from the depths of the community's despair. Those who had once cowered behind locked doors and shuttered windows, were now stepping out in secret meetings, sharing hopes and plans, with a newfound resolve that sparkled in their eyes. The fight was no longer hers alone. It had transformed into something larger, something collective, a rising tide of resistance that refused to bow. Children, who had been told to stay silent and hidden, now listened with wide, hopeful eyes to the stories of bravery Emma told, learning that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Mothers and fathers, worn thin by hardship and loss, found strength in each other, their whispered prayers turning into promises of action. The town itself seemed to breathe differently, as if the very soil beneath their feet was charged with a fierce determination to reclaim freedom. Even the weary horses outside the saloon seemed to sense the change, stamping impatiently, as if eager to run alongside this swelling force. Emma's heart ached with a mixture of pride and sorrow as she watched this transformation unfold. Pride, because the people she loved were waking from their slumber of fear. Sorrow, because she knew that with this awakening would come great trials and sacrifices. The Iron Brigade was not known for mercy, and the road ahead would be paved with hardship. But the fire was lit, and it could not be extinguished. In hushed tones, the townspeople began to share stories of small victories. A hidden message slipped past a guard, a wagon that escaped through a secret trail, a brave soul who stood up and refused to bow. These acts, though small, became symbols of hope that spread like wildfire. Emma's leadership was no longer about commanding, it was about nurturing this fire, guiding the community's spirit without extinguishing the fragile hope that flickered in every heart. Nights were spent planning, voices low but firm, hands shaking but determined, as they mapped out their next moves. Emma found herself listening more than speaking, learning the fears and dreams of those around her, knowing that their strength lay not in a single person but in their unity. The saloon, once a place of despair, became a secret haven, where courage was nurtured, and dreams of freedom were born anew. The clinking of glasses was replaced by the tapping of fingers on worn tables, maps unfolding, plans being whispered with cautious optimism. Even in the darkest moments, when the Iron Brigade tightened their grip and the shadows grew longer, the people found ways to resist, not always with weapons or words, but with their unyielding spirit. Emma felt a fierce protectiveness for her community swell within her, a fierce, wild love that gave her strength to face whatever came next. The days were long and fraught with danger, but each morning brought renewed determination, each sunset a reminder of what was at stake. The children, once frightened and silent, now spoke of the day the town would be free. The elders, who had seen too many struggles before, nodded quietly in approval, their eyes reflecting a hope they had almost forgotten. Together they formed a tapestry of resilience and defiance, a community on the edge of change, ready to reclaim their lives from the shadows of oppression. And as the Iron Brigade patrolled the streets, unaware of the revolution quietly growing around them, Emma and her people held on to one truth, that even in the darkest night, the smallest spark could ignite a blaze that would light the way to freedom. Their fight was no longer just a battle for survival, it was a fight for their souls, their dignity, and the future they dreamed of building together. And with every heartbeat, with every whispered word and secret smile, they edged closer to a dawn, where fear would no longer rule, and the town would rise again, stronger and united. This was their fight now, not Emma's alone but theirs, bound by hope, courage, and the unbreakable bond of a community, refusing to be broken. Emma stood in front of the mirror, her reflection a delicate mask of calm beneath the soft glow of candlelight. The gown she wore was a masterpiece of silk and lace, shimmering with every breath she took, a perfect disguise for the deadly resolve she harbored beneath the layers of fabric. Tonight was not a night for celebration, despite the laughter and music that would fill the governor's grand hall. It was a night of reckoning, the moment when all the sacrifices, all the hidden dangers, and every whispered plan would come to a head. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck, but her eyes remained steady, focused on the woman staring back at her, strong, fearless, and ready. She had hidden her weapons well, small, precise tools tucked discreetly beneath the folds of her dress, just in case the night turned violent. The governor's celebration was a gathering of power, a place where alliances were forged and broken with a smile or a glance, and Emma knew many of those around her wished her harm. Enemies, yes, some dressed in elegant suits and sparkling dresses, others cloaked in charm and whispered threats, all waiting for a chance to strike or manipulate. Yet, Emma had never been more certain of her purpose. This night was her last chance to protect what mattered most, her family, her friends, the future they all dreamed of. She took a deep breath and stepped out into the corridor, the sound of her heels clicking softly against the polished marble. Each step echoed the steady beat of her heart, a rhythm that reminded her she was alive and in control. The hall was already filling with guests, their voices a low murmur of polite conversation and cautious observation. She greeted each with a smile that never reached her eyes, masking the storm of emotions beneath fear, anger, hope, and an unbreakable will to survive. Emma's mind flashed back to the years of preparation leading to this moment. Secret meetings in shadowed rooms, whispered plans in hidden corners, the faces of those who had sacrificed everything to stand with her now. She thought of the friends lost along the way, the betrayals that had cut deeper than any blade, and the quiet moments of doubt she had overcome. Tonight, none of that mattered except the mission. As she moved through the crowd, her eyes scanned for familiar faces, some allies, some foes. The governor himself was a towering figure near the center of the room, his smile broad but eyes sharp, as if he knew the storm brewing beneath the surface of this glittering celebration. Emma approached him calmly, her voice steady as she exchanged pleasantries laced with hidden meaning. Every word was a careful chess move, every glance a signal to those who understood. The music swelled and the dance began, swirling like a dangerous game where one misstep could mean ruin. Emma danced with grace, her body moving fluidly as her mind remained alert, calculating ready. She felt the weight of every second, knowing that soon the moment would come, when words gave way to action. A subtle nod from a trusted ally brought a flicker of reassurance. Her heart pounded louder but her face stayed serene. As the night deepened, shadows lengthened, and the tension thickened. Emma slipped away from the crowd into a quieter room, her hand reaching beneath her dress to touch the cold steel of a hidden dagger. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength from the memories of those she fought for. The air was thick with expectation, every breath a whisper of fate. Returning to the hall, Emma spotted the target, a man whose cruelty had haunted her people for years. He was laughing now, unaware of the storm about to descend upon him. The final moments stretched taut as a wire, every heartbeat a drum, signaling the inevitable. Emma's hand moved swiftly, precise, as the world narrowed to a single point of purpose. Time seemed to freeze, the noise of the party fading into a silent backdrop, as she faced the truth she had lived for, freedom at any cost. When the night finally broke, and the echoes of the past settled into silence, Emma stood tall amidst the chaos she had wrought. Her gown, once pristine, was now marked with the evidence of her fight, but her spirit remained unbroken. She had faced her enemies, her fears and the uncertain future, and emerged not just as a survivor, but as a beacon of hope. The night of reckoning was over, but the story was only just beginning. Inside the dimly lit study, the air was thick with tension, as Colonel Harrison, the iron-willed leader of the railroad, locked eyes with Emma, his voice low but laced with bitter certainty. "I know who you really are," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a sharpened blade. Emma's heart pounded, but her face remained a mask of calm determination. She had anticipated this moment, yet the weight of betrayal threatened to shake her resolve. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a crucible, where trust and deception intertwined. And the stakes were higher than ever before. The room seemed to shrink as the unspoken past between them hung in the air, memories flashing behind her eyes, friendships broken, secrets buried, and the lives lost in the shadow of war. But Emma was faster, sharper, deadlier. Before Harrison could utter another threat, her hand was already reaching for the hidden blade beneath her sleeve. The first shot echoed like thunder, shattering the fragile calm, sending a ripple through the compound outside. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Allies, who had blended into the shadows, revealed themselves with swift precision, their movements like silent wolves, striking at the heart of the enemy's stronghold. From the corners of the room to the corridors beyond, every step was part of the intricate plan Emma had orchestrated for months. The betrayal in the study was only the spark that ignited the larger rebellion. Emma moved with purpose, her mind focused on the core of the conspiracy that had ensnared them all. Each breath she took was a reminder of the price she had paid, and the price yet to come. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders, but she refused to falter. This was more than a battle for survival. It was a fight for justice, for the truth buried beneath layers of lies and deception. As the gunfire continued, a storm of emotions surged within her: anger, sorrow, hope, and fierce determination. She thought of the faces of those who had believed in her, who had sacrificed everything. The past haunted her steps, but it also fueled her forward. With every heartbeat, Emma became more than just a fugitive. She became a beacon of resistance, a symbol of courage in a world consumed by darkness. The study, once a place of secrets and shadows, was now the epicenter of a war that would decide their fate. Emma's eyes blazed with the fire of conviction as she stepped deeper into the fray, knowing that once she crossed this line, there was no turning back. The betrayal was personal, but the fight was universal, a clash between oppression and freedom, between silence and the roar of truth. In this moment, amid the chaos and bloodshed, Emma was not alone. Her allies moved with quiet urgency, each playing their part in the carefully woven tapestry of rebellion. The corridors echoed with footsteps, whispers of hope mingling with the harsh cries of battle. Every second was a test of courage and resolve, every decision a step toward redemption or ruin. Emma's mind raced as she navigated the maze of corridors, her senses heightened, aware that danger lurked in every shadow. The conspiracy they sought to dismantle was vast and insidious, woven into the very fabric of the railroad's command. But Emma's determination was unyielding. She could see the endgame clearly now, the moment when the truth would be unveiled, and justice would finally be served. The betrayal by Colonel Harrison had been a devastating blow, but it also exposed the cracks in the enemy's armor, cracks that Emma and her allies would exploit. As she reached the heart of the compound, she found herself face to face with the masterminds behind the conspiracy, their faces twisted with greed and cruelty. The confrontation was inevitable, a collision of wills and ideals that would shape the future of the railroad and all who depended on it. Emma's voice was steady as she spoke, each word carrying the weight of years of struggle and sacrifice. The battle that followed was fierce and relentless, a testament to the resilience of those who dared to fight for what was right. In the end, the betrayal and the standoff were not just moments in a story, they were the crucible that forged a new path forward, a path marked by courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to be silent. As the dust settled and the first light of dawn broke through the windows of the study, Emma stood victorious yet solemn, knowing the fight was far from over. The echoes of the betrayal would linger, but so would the hope that had been reignited that night, a hope that promised a future where justice and freedom could finally prevail. The story of Emma and the railroad was now etched into history, a powerful reminder of the cost of truth and the strength found in standing together against the darkness. Gunfire cracked like thunder across the vast dusty expanse of the ranch, echoing through the valleys and rolling hills that had once been a peaceful home to families and hard-working ranchers, a place where honest souls had built their lives with sweat, love, and unwavering hope. Now, chaos ruled. Thick smoke curled through the air, mingling with the cries of battle and the desperate shouts of those caught in the storm of violence. Emma stood at the center of it all, her eyes sharp, heart pounding, every breath a struggle against the smoke and the overwhelming odds. She wasn't just a fighter, she was the last beacon of hope for everyone who had suffered under the weight of greed and corruption that had threatened to swallow their way of life whole. Around her, old enemies circled, faces twisted with hatred and greed, their weapons raised and ready to end her story. They outnumbered her 10 to 1, but Emma's spirit was unbreakable. She had fought too long, lost too much, and dreamed too fiercely to let darkness win this final day. Every shot she fired, every move she made, was a testament to the countless families who depended on her, mothers who whispered prayers for their children's safety, fathers who stood guard over their homesteads, children who looked up to her as a symbol of courage. Emma was not alone in this fight. The echoes of those who had fallen before her filled her soul, their sacrifices fueling her will to stand tall amid the storm. The ground beneath her was stained with the marks of struggle, footprints, blood, and the scattered remnants of broken dreams. Yet Emma's gaze never faltered. The legend of Deadeye Thorn, whispered around campfires and passed down through generations, was alive and burning brighter than ever. She fought not for glory or fame, but for the truth that some things, some values are worth every ounce of pain and every breath taken under fire. The ranch was more than just land. It was a sanctuary, a promise to those who had come before and those yet to come. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Emma's resolve hardened like steel. The sounds of battle slowed, the chaos beginning to fade into a heavy silence, pierced only by the crackle of dying fires. Some heroes had fallen that day, their names forever etched in the hearts of those who survived, but Emma stood tall, bloodied, weary, but unyielding. She raised her eyes to the horizon, where the sky burned with the colors of a hard-won dawn. The legend of Deadeye Thorn was no longer just a tale, it was a living testament to the unbreakable human spirit, to the power of standing firm against the tide of darkness. Emma knew that even if she were to fall, the story would live on, whispered in the wind and carried by the hearts of every family who refused to be broken. Because some things are worth dying for: freedom, honor, love, and the unshakable belief that heroes never truly disappear. They become part of the land, part of the people, part of the endless fight for a better tomorrow. And so, with the last echoes of battle fading behind her, Emma turned her face toward the rising sun, ready to carry the legend forward, to protect the dreams of the innocent, and to remind the world that legends never die. They live on in every act of courage, in every heart that refuses to yield, and in every soul brave enough to stand and say, "This land, these people, this life, they are worth everything." The battle was over, but the story had only just begun. Emma, the Deadeye Thorn, would forever be a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope shines through, and some heroes, against all odds, rise to meet their destiny.